Hello friends, welcome to channel Quest for Soma. So today we'll talk about timing of composition of Vedas. What if I told you that the Vedas might have been composed in AD era, that is common era. Maybe they might not be as old as it is generally perceived to be. They might be just 1,000-year old, not more than that. So that might be one of our findings. So we'll discuss the timing of composition of Vedas today, and why it is important to discuss timing of composition of Veda is because we are talking about identity of plant Soma. So for deciphering the identity of plant Soma, we need to locate the context, that is geographical place and the time at which these Vedas might have been composed. Then only we can come to conclusion that okay, these this was the culture in which Vedas were composed. So there is a good possibility that ABC substances might be termed as Soma. So from that perspective, it is important to determine it is important to determine the timing of composition of Rig Veda or Vedas for that matter, but I'll mostly talk about Rig Veda because Rig Veda is the first Veda, considered to be the first of the 4 Vedas which are there in Hindu culture. So generally Rig Veda is considered to be the oldest Veda. It is argued that it was written maybe 1,000,000 years back. Some people say that it was orally carried by oral tradition for million of years, and then subsequently it was codified or written in a common era, or what we call as after death era. But we will delve into that deeper today. So one is of course what is the mainstream view today. The first point is what is the mainstream view. So mainstream view being that as of now the historians assume around 1500 BCE, that is 1500 before Christ era, that is the time around which it is considered that Rig Vedas were composed. Of course, there is no archaeological evidence for this. There is no archaeological evidence for this composition of Rig Veda, or as I mentioned in other of my episode, there is no mention of Soma or Veda in any of the inscriptions relating to before Christ era. So from archaeology perspective, it is not clear that Vedas were composed in before Christ era. In fact, from archaeological perspective, there is also doubt that whether Vedas existed in even in oral form in before Christ era, and that doubt, you can see my other videos, that doubt is created by the fact that there is no mention of Vedas, Soma, or any gods which are mentioned in Vedas in any of the inscription of Maurya period. As you all know, Ashoka the Great was the prominent king of Maurya periods. He had written various inscriptions and edicts throughout India, even covering modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan. So from that context, absence of Vedas and absence of Sanskrit language and absence of Soma word, that creates a doubt that whether Vedic society, Vedic culture was there in India in before Christ era or not. So therefore, from that perspective, it becomes important to further delve into the topic of timing of composition of Rig Veda, whether there is any solid proof of existence of oral traditions in relation to Vedas. So from that perspective, it also becomes equally important to determine the timeline in which Sanskrit might have been framed. So typically Sanskrit is considered as mother of all Proto-Indian European languages. People argue that all languages, Latin and Iranian, that is Persian, might have come from Sanskrit. But there is no archaeological proof for that. So and from a common sense perspective, it's considering that there is archaeological proof for Prakrit languages, that is the language in which Ashoka's inscriptions were written. So there is a proof of that in BC era. There is no proof of Sanskrit. So on the basis of inscriptions of the before Christ era, we come to 2 conclusions. First is that either because of the fact that there is no mention of Vedas or Soma or usage of Sanskrit language in any of the inscriptions for the BC era, we might have to take a conclusion, arrive at a conclusion. There is no other option left but to arrive at conclusion that either Vedas or Somas were not in existence, or Sanskrit language was not in existence at the time of writing of Ashoka's inscription. That might be one scenario. Second is that they were there, but they were not very popular. It might have been a marginalized culture practiced in northwestern parts of India or parts which are there in the modern day Afghanistan. So that might be another conclusion. A third conclusion, which looks slightly odd, is that Ashoka or Mauryan kings intentionally decided to avoid Sanskrit or Sanskrit or mention of Vedas. That looks slightly surprising, especially given the fact that Sanskrit is a very refined language, glamorous language in a way. So from that perspective, it doesn't make sense for a king to not use that language and show his further greatness in that language. From that perspective, this creates a doubt regarding existence of Vedas or oral culture in before Christ era. At least in India, it might have existed in Iran or Mitanni area, as we have discussed in other episode, but in the Indian area, it is likely, or there's some possibility, not likely, let's not use that term because that might hurt sentiments of the believer, but there is some possibility that it might not have when I'm saying it here, it means that Vedas or Sanskrit or Soma was as such, these words or these Sanskrit language was not there in the before Christ era. If we moving from archaeology to language, analysis of language of Rig Veda, in Rig Veda there are certain proofs, in a way you can say, which demonstrate that either Rig Veda is not that old, or it is possible that certain parts were old, but large part of it was basically written later on in the AD era, maybe between 500 AD to 1500 AD, somewhere. That 1500 AD, it might look slightly odd to believers, but why I'm saying 1500 AD is that even if you search on Google or use any AI and ask what is the earliest available scripture of Vedas, so then it will point to some version which Indian government has given to UN, and that version is essentially claiming it to be version from Nepal from 15th century, around 1460 or 70. That is the timeline which government of India is saying that earliest available manuscript of Rig Veda is of 1400s. So it is possible that it might have been composed not in 1400 but in AD era when Sanskrit was developed. Why I'm saying now that when Sanskrit was developed, so as of now the main theory is that Sanskrit was the mother language, and then the culture, then the language became vulgar because masses started using that language, and from that Sanskrit, from the Sanskrit, which was a very refined and cultured language, came local languages such as Bhojpuri, Punjabi, or the Marathi and other things. So that is basically that is the theory which is there. Similarly, it says that Sanskrit is the mother language for European languages and Iranian languages. Of course, there are similarities between Sanskrit and those languages. Certain words have been found to be similar, like the most cited example is mother. Mata in Hindi or Sanskrit, and then it becomes mother in English. Similarly, for father, it is the example of father is cited, that how Pita in Hindi becomes Pitra somewhere and then becomes father somewhere. So this is a theory which is there, that okay, Sanskrit was the mother language, from that other languages came out. But I think there are certain points which create doubt. Of course, there is if we analyze it, I think from common sense perspective also, then there is some doubt. But let's talk about common sense perspective later on, and first talk about this perspective which language analysis, the linguistics people, they have taken. So there are writings by even by Western authors, mostly in start of this century, earlier century, around 1920, 1930. We'll mention those in the description to this videos, who are saying that there are various words from Dravid language which have been imported into Vedas. And why they are saying is because we have now this theory of Sanskrit being mother languages. So if it was a mother language of Proto-Indian, European, Indo-Iranian and European languages, if Sanskrit was mother language, then the words which are there in Sanskrit should ideally be there in other languages also, which are coming from mother language. But one interesting aspect which we find is something called retroflex sounds. In those of you who are watching from India or know Hindi, so there is one sound, ta tha da da, ta tha da da na. So that sound is basically Dravidian sounds. That's what linguistics tells us, that is a Dravidian sound, and that is not there in other Proto-Indo-Iranian European languages. So Sanskrit might have imported these retroflex sounds from these Dravidian or local languages, and then basically incorporated that in Veda. So existence of this language in Sanskrit words also creates that doubt. Similarly, in Indian language, local language Prakrit, there are basically there was no words which are current in the modern day Hindi pronounced as cha, cha, ja, jha. So those words again seems to be imported from Persia, because Persian has those words. Interestingly, the usage of those words also seems to be aligned with inscriptions of Persian Empire. So for example, Kshatriya word, we do not find mention of that sorts of word in BC era or in Prakrit era. In fact, if we look at alphabets, the linguist people argue that if we look at alphabets which were there in Prakrit language, there is not possible to come up with words like Kshatriya or Rishi, or even for that matter Rig Veda, Veda itself. So these words were basically taken from Persian. So what this analysis is essentially telling us is that there is no archaeological proof of existence of Vedas or Sanskrit in before Christ era. Secondly, the Sanskrit language may not be the oldest language because it imports various words from Dravidian. Similarly, it imports various words from Indian local languages as well. I am a speaker of one of the native languages of India, and I know that various words in Sanskrit and that local language, the name of that language is Bhojpuri, are same. Now people will argue, because that is the mainstream view, that yes, this makes perfect sense because Sanskrit is a mother language, and Bhojpuri and other local languages would have come from that mother languages, so therefore there might be similarity between Bhojpuri and Sanskrit. But then that cuts into The first point being whether there is archaeological evidence of Sanskrit in before Christ era, the answer is no. Whether there is archaeological evidence for existence of Prakrit and other local languages in BC era, answer is yes. So therefore, from archaeology perspective, Prakrit comes first, Sanskrit comes second. We are told in the mainstream view that Sanskrit comes first and Prakrit comes second. So this what we are generally taught, or what mainstream view is, that is in contradiction to archaeological finding. That is also in contradiction to, as I mentioned, linguistics finding, because linguistic findings are also saying that there are certain Dravidian words which are there. Of course, there are various Prakrit words are also there. So these two approaches, archaeological as well as linguistics, are saying that this is Sanskrit is a product of AD era, Common Era, and so therefore Vedas were composed in Common Era. So therefore, whatever Soma would be, it would be a substance that was used in Common Era. I know some people, specifically from India, they would be thinking that what nonsense, how it is possible that Vedas were composed in after Death era. So that was my initial reaction as well. But then when I started delving into it further, I started looking for evidence further. Then I thought that I have no option but to come up with this sort of conclusion. And in that research, I also found, it's important to mention that I also found writings of various Western scholars as well as our Dalit writers in India. Dalit meaning basically subaltern writers for wider audience. Those writers, though they have specifically talked about these aspects, that why Vedas may not be that old as it is generally claimed to be. On the basis of my archaeological finding and on the basis of applying a lawyer-like approach, I tend to agree with their finding of our Dalit brothers and sisters who basically are questioning the timing of Veda. So I tend to agree with them. Of course, there is no political agenda as far as I am concerned for that. The people might be doing, different people might be doing it from different perspective. I am doing it from the perspective of giving justice to the things or cultures which have been marginalized by our society. So from that perspective, we have taken up the issue of marginalization of Bhang. So we are more concerned about those sorts of things which are marginalized. So a language, local language, in a way, they have also been marginalized, and we might delve into deeper into those that issue as well in the later episodes. But returning to our topic for today. So I would like to say to all my Indian brothers and sisters that of course I was also surprised by my findings, and then there was also support from other Western authors and Dalit authors to that finding. So I tend to think that this is the correct finding from a legal perspective if I were to look at things from a lawyer's perspective, but happy to basically get corrected if you have any contradictory evidence which shows that okay, there is a mention of Veda or Soma in before Christ era in any of the Indian inscriptions or edicts. Similarly, if there is any use of Sanskrit in the BC era, then happy to get corrected. But as far as my research goes, there are no concrete evidence for this because of the fact that there is very much similarity between Indian local language and Sanskrit. So what people can do is that in various inscriptions which are in Prakrit and at the time when Sanskrit was being developed, we have one more related point which comes is that we have evidence of hybrid Sanskrit being developed at Buddhist universities in India. That evidence is for after that era, 100 AD, 200 AD. So there is evidence that there was a effort to further refine Prakrit language into a language which was to be called as Sanskrit by the Buddhist people. So that sort of evidence is there for 200 or 100 AD, 200 and 300 AD. But after that there is no evidence. Suddenly we find that there are Vedas which have much more sophisticated sophisticated Sanskrit, but they have apparently been written thousands of years before AD era. So that I hate to say that word, but that looks like a conspiracy, some sort of conspiracy. Assume for a moment, while not accepting that it was a conspiracy, because somewhere deep down my heart also I am looking to get corrected if there is archaeological evidence. It should be solid evidence, because I think our Dalit brothers, they are also right, our subaltern writers, they are also right in coming to conclusion, because they are also taking a scientific approach, evidence-based approach, and coming to conclusion that basically Veda and Sanskrit are not that old. So their theory is, which I tend to agree, is that after Buddhist Sanskrit, people would have further developed that into Sanskrit, and that may be the point of time in which Rig Vedas were composed. So according to them, according to subaltern authors, various authors, according to them, basically this culture, Vedic culture, there was nothing called Vedic culture. Even if it was there, it was marginalized. There was nothing called Vedic culture in before Christ era. It was superimposed in AD era after invasion by Persians and Muslims. So it was superimposed. While obviously no one can be certain that what happened at that point of time, but on the basis of archaeological and the language perspective, I tend to agree with them. Where does it take us in the context of our research for identity of plant Soma? So it takes us closer in a way to our conclusion, that is, in fact, Soma was intentionally disguised, because Vedas were composed in AD era. Vedas were composed with a certain purpose, and that purpose was to basically do some sort of projection. So from that purpose, it makes total sense to hide the identity of plant Soma, or basically disguise the plant Soma. As mentioned earlier, one strong point in favor of disguising that plant is also that it is necessary to disguise that plant if one wants that priestly culture, importance of priests should continue to be there in the society. So from that perspective, it was hidden, but this timing makes our thesis stronger, that opium, when Vedas were composed, Soma term was used, then the two substances were in the minds of its composers or authors. Those two substances being opium and cannabis. Both substances were used by different classes. One was opium mostly by warrior classes, fighting classes, cannabis by priestly classes. That was the construct of Veda, in which Soma, Veda, and the mention of Soma in the Veda. So our finding doesn't get disturbed. In fact, we have come to that finding after all that research regarding opium and Soma being opium and cannabis being the stronger candidate of Soma. So that finding doesn't get disturbed. You can look at these sorts of aspects and various aspects which are there in my book, An Immortal's Quest for Soma. The details of that book you will find in posts of this channel. Even there is an audio book playlist, so you can go through that playlist, and some chapters I have already put, so you can listen to those chapters. Other chapters will be coming soon. In the meantime, if you want to buy, the book is also available on Amazon Kindle. So that's it for today. Thank you for your time. See you in the next episode. Thank you.